Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Catherine Bennett.
And I'm Mark Lambert.
And joining us today is Tricia Bola. I'm not sure I've pronounced that entirely correct, but you'll correct me. Tricia, who's visiting the UK to talk about her missionary work, founder of the St. Francis Xavier Lay Missionary Society. And you're working in the Far East doing missionary work there. Missionary work isn't something we hear as much about these days, so it's great to have you on the show to talk about this. So first of all, let's get the name pronunciation right and then tell us a little about your work.
Yes, thank you so much, Catherine. My name is Tricia Bola, and it really is a pleasure to be here to share about, I think, the importance of mission in the world today. I think with many Catholics, when we think in terms of what it means to be a missionary, we think they usually come in three kinds. Priests, sisters, and Protestants. And so the idea that a Catholic layperson can actually serve in the mission field is something that doesn't really come into our normal daily brain in terms of vocation. And so that's something that's really important for us to recognize as missionaries. As Catholics, many of us could actually be called to be that missionary. I mean, every single one of us, by virtue of our baptism in Christ Jesus, is called to be evangelists, right? We are all called to participate in Christ's work here on earth, to help lead other people to Christ and his salvation. And that is the role and responsibility of every. And a few of us, though, we're called to go beyond sort of the neighborhoods of humanity in which we find ourselves, to be that evangelist in another culture, in another land. And so that is basically the vocation of a missionary, to leave one's home, one's culture, and go into a foreign land and culture and proclaim Christ, witness Christ in all that we do. And that can take on many different forms. And I mean, I think another thing that we also worry about, even amongst Catholics, a number of years ago, I was at, it was actually a mass, it was an altar feast for some Dominican nuns in California. And one of the friars there was preaching on the calling of the 72 disciples to go out by Christ. And he said, that might have been wonderful, 2,000 years ago, but here in this day and age, he said, we don't see people opening up their homes for missionaries, the way Jesus said of the 72. And he said, here we are, and at the time in Silicon Valley, and Palo Alto, Stanford, Menlo Park, Atherton, all these really upscale communities in Silicon Valley. And he said, imagine if today we would have some missionary, which we don't anymore, knocking on somebody's door, asking for a place to stay, and somebody welcoming them in. He said, this is this wonderful romantic notion of 2,000 years ago, but nothing we would see in the present day. And here I was sitting in the fifth pew back, staring down at my key ring, and I had exactly keys to people's homes in the very cities that he said nobody would ever open their homes to, because this was my life. My very existence was in this call to evangelization, and so it's and this call to mission. So I think people need to recognize that mission isn't something that died out in the 17th century. It is something that is not only alive and well today. There's increasing need for it. In many parts of Asia where a mission serves, actually the church is in the extreme minority. Most places less than 10%. In some countries that we've served, less than 1%. Less than 1% of the population is Christian. And that's inclusive of Catholics and Protestants together. So yes, there is still very much a need for mission in the church today.
We find that some people would argue that California is somewhere that really needs mission. Tricia, would you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, coming from the US, there's many, many parts. And I think it's on the one hand, good to see that there are increases of a lot of younger people starting to take their faith more seriously now, a lot of ministry programs, a lot of new life being breathed into the church today, back home in the US and California. And even, during this most recent journey that I've been having around the UK, I've been hearing from different people, oh, hey, it's like we're seeing an uptick in the number of people who are going to Mass, especially among young people, university students. But that uptick is by just a few percentage points. We're still seeing, the vast majority of people not going to church, not identifying as Christian. So I think it's a little early to pat ourselves on the back. There's still much work to be done.
I suppose the reason that we've seen a drop off in missionary activity, people would largely theologically, people would put that at the feet of Vatican II and say that Lumen Gentium, particularly Lumen Gentium 16, did away with the need for missionary work at all, and that's obviously been the cause of a great deal of confusion in the church. We had sort of pseudo theologians like Leonardo Boff, who was recently sort of rehabilitated by Pope Francis, arguing that has Tricia gone completely?
Oh, I'm back. Sorry.
Oh, she's back. Yeah, we've had people like Leonardo Boff who argued that Lumen Gentium 16 meant that we didn't need to go and evangelize anyone anymore. And obviously that was put right by Dominus Jesus, which was written by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. So there was this confusion about what it meant, but there's absolutely no doubt that the missionary zeal of the church has diminished since that time. And that really centers around this doctrine of the church that we call EENS, isn't it? Ecclesia nulla salus, like that that basically with outside the church, no one is saved. I would imagine to be a missionary, you've got to have a firm hold of that doctrine, that's got to be something that drives you forward, is that Jesus can change people's lives so powerfully, that it's essential for people to receive Jesus in that way.
Yeah, I think when we look at what the church teaches around salvation, and I know actually in Vatican II, it kind of helped open our understanding of what it means as somebody outside the church. But we even predating that, we have the doctrine of invincible ignorance, which is something that's, I think, important to keep in mind. I actually use that teaching to offer hope and as a reminder of the importance of praying for the dead. When I've worked in different parts of Asia and served there, where there are people who have come to Christ, but whose parents or grandparents or aunt and uncle died without having encountered the gospel. Maybe because they were raised in a communist society or some other kind of regime in which the gospel wasn't properly allowed to enter. And so we do have those doctrines that really go back to understanding the mercy of God and the desire of God that all people might have that opportunity to enter into salvation. That being said, we can't just, we got this doctrine, that means I don't have to do anything. I actually would argue the opposite. Again, I think it's what you were saying, Mark. If we look at the transformative, our faith, it's a living faith, it's alive. When one becomes a Christian, when one is baptized, it is meant to transform. I really like Pope Benedict XVI in Spe Salvi. He says, the gospel is not meant to be simply informative, but rather performative. If one truly receives the gospel and its teachings and takes it within, it really is meant to transform our lives. And it's what gives us the martyrs, right? Because they truly believe that our citizenship is not here. It's in the life that is to come. Our citizenship is in heaven. And again, to quote Spe Salvi, Pope Benedict would say, the one who lives in hope lives differently. And that is so important. Part of what we do, especially in this Jubilee year of hope, we're called to be that witness of hope. And when we can offer that hope that we can only truly have in the most grandest way in Jesus Christ, then it invites people into a new way of living. And it can give so much encouragement. I mean, we look around in our own societies, we look around at what's happening in the world, and it's so easy to get discouraged. But if we remember that, just that key understanding that Christ has already won the victory, right? And so now it really becomes into this battle for individual souls at this point, including our own. But we live in that hope of Christ, that Christ did not die in vain. I mean, this is that whole thing that, Paul talks about, this thing that would be, we preach Christ crucified, this foolishness to the Greeks. But we preach it because of the hope that we have in Christ. And this is that hope that we seek to offer to other people. And this is what Paul talked about, even in his chains, in these moments when other people would think that one would despair, right? And yet he said, it's actually given me even greater opportunity for witness. And I think that's the beautiful witness of even like the martyrs and those who have been really persecuted for their faith in Jesus Christ, is they still hold on to hope. They still hold on to, there's a certain joy, a peace, a consolation that they're given by God's grace because they know that this is not the end. And in that, they give this incredible witness of the serenity and the strength that can never be broken. And that's what draws people in. That's what attracts them in, to come to know the source of that hope. And that's what St. Peter talks about in 1 Peter 3:13. He says to always be ready to give an account of the hope that you have in Jesus Christ. And that's something that every Christian should try and seek to live out in their daily lives.
So what are you offering? How do you, one of the best questions that I was ever asked by Sherry Waddell, I don't know if you know Sherry Waddell.
Yes,
Yeah. So was, what is the good news? So this is the front line for you. What you go into another country, they've never heard about Jesus or the Bible or anything like that. How do you summarize the good news for them?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So just a quick story to lead into this. A number of years ago when Martin Scorsese's film Silence came out, and I was asked to give a number of presentations on that in Hong Kong, at Stanford University in California, and a couple Dominican parishes. And one place in Hong Kong I was asked to speak at was at a university. It was a Catholic professor who was teaching a film class. And he thought this would be a great opportunity to bring me in to speak on this film by this, acclaimed film director, and with a lot of these Christian themes that come out in this film. And so I gave this presentation, and at one point, a student raises his hand at this university, and he says, "So, what is it, this person that people are so willing to die for?" And I said, "Oh, hold on a second," and I realized I had been making an assumption. And I said, "Raise your hand if you are familiar with who Jesus Christ is and the Gospels of the Bible." And only about a fifth of the class raised their hands. I said, "So most of you have never heard of Jesus Christ?" And there was a lot of blank stares, and I couldn't believe it. Here we are in Hong Kong, which had been a British colony for 99 years. And there's a lot of missionary work by the church. A lot of mission religious congregations are actually based in Hong Kong, though fewer now. But at any rate, and yet so many of these students had not even heard the gospel. And so I had about 5 minutes left in the class. I grabbed a marker from the whiteboard and started doing basically a stick figure explanation of the charisma of Jesus Christ, and it really, to answer your question then, Mark, is to say, that first of all, we were created by a God who loves us, a God who is love, who created us out of love for love. But for various reasons, we were not satisfied enough with this love. We turned away from this love, seeking and being willing to settle for something less than that love. And so we broke away. We turned against God, our creator, and we've sinned, and I use different terminology to help maybe figure out where people were at different stages of understanding, using language they could, grasp around. And then I said, But God, who loves us so much, he was not content to see us suffer, the suffering that we had basically made for ourselves. And so he sought to rescue us, to save us from ultimately this this damnation that we had allowed ourselves to fall into, this suffering that would only lead to death. And to save us from that, he sent his only beloved Son. And his Son came and lived among us, performed great deeds to witness to his power, his love, his healing, his mercy and compassion for the people. He taught many good wisdom to help us in our lives to grow and learn from him, because he is God and he desires only for our goodness and that which will give us our greatest joy. And and then even there were amongst us those who were ready to receive this, those who were not yet ready to receive. In the end, he still wanted to provide that opening for as many of us as possible to enter into salvation. And by that, I meant to move beyond the suffering of this life. And when we should all very likely meet our own death, that we would have the opportunity to enter into a true paradise, to share in this ocean of love, this joy that would be never ending, far beyond all imagining, by allowing his Son to suffer and die for us, for all the things that we've done wrong in our lives, to take, and it's always funny, I really had to kind of make it basic. I don't want to say like take that punishment upon himself, because there's all the different soteriology, soteriology, you have to be careful, like say what you say. But basically breaking it down, this kind of redemptive suffering to redeem us, and and there's and to give us this new life in his Son, and his Son is Jesus Christ, who offered this. So this is, and when we are called to believe in him, as we all are, and to live out our life, once we come into this understanding of Christ in our lives, to grow in that understanding as we would grow in love with any person who we deeply care for, and then to share that love, share that joy that we have found with those around us. And this is what we are all called to do, and invite, and there's always that invitation. When I speak on a number of years ago, my spiritual director had arranged for me to give a talk at the Gregorian on cross-cultural evangelization. And I said, I like to kind of boil evangelization down to kind of three things. One is witness, witness, relationship, and invitation. And so there is that necessary invitation at the end of that to invite them in, to come to know Jesus, to, in this case with this university class I was speaking at, the opportunity to, if you're curious and want to learn more about the film, anything I've talked about with regard to Japanese history, the concept of martyrdom, or learn who Jesus Christ is and learn more about what he was about and what he is about today, and who God is, and a deeper understanding of your purpose in life and your uniqueness. If you're desiring to understand any aspect of that, I would love to find a time to meet with you later today after class, find another time later on in the coming week. So always that invitation to have a further conversation with somebody about our faith, about who Jesus Christ is, about God's desire for their life. And that's really important as well. So that's kind of, you have to have that invitation. And I think that's where a lot of us, we provide the witness with somebody we've built a relationship with, but then we all too often, I think, stop short of that last component, of that last step of invitation, inviting them in to know Christ, inviting them into that encounter with our Lord. And so that's something that I think is really important, that I like to speak on.
As I hear you,
go
on. As I hear you speak, Tricia, I'm minded of the situation here in the UK, and of course it will be similar in the US and around parts of Europe in the West. And in some ways, I imagine it's probably easier, in some ways, not in every way, to speak to these people about this new person of Jesus, uncorrupted by the the deformation that's taken place in the West. And I think in our Catholic schools, what you're saying there, I think this needs to happen. We need mission in our Catholic schools, because you said something that is so important, and I go on about it all the time, which is we've forgotten where we come from and we've forgotten where we're going. And it's such a basic and simple starting point, but we don't think we need to start from the beginning. Where you are, you're saying, look, this is unknown, and so I start from the beginning in this very basic. And I think we almost have to go back to basics in our own Catholic education, because we're not doing that. We're starting from this point, this assumption, oh, do this, sprinkle holy water, and then let's talk about all the stuff in the modern world. And it's like, actually, these young people are broken and damaged and have the vision, that beautiful vision that you've spoken about is not clear to them at all, in part because of the failures in education and in catechesis. So I don't know what you think about that, whether you see that maybe even here that mission needs to take place where we have a Christian history.
So I have it's really important, I think, to say. So a few things pop in my mind, and I'll try and remember them all. One is, I remember, I think it was Fulton Sheen who once said that people don't hate the church, they hate this idea of what they think the church actually is. And what I like to think is, if people truly understood who Christ is, instead they have this weird caricature of Jesus, they understood who Christ truly is, they would be stumbling over themselves to get before the Blessed Sacrament on their knees. They would be like, oh my goodness, this whole, that whole kind of St. Augustine response of, you flash, you shone in my blindness, and broke through all of it. And so for many people, it's to help break through this caricature that they have in their minds of what Christianity is, who Jesus is, what God's all about and everything. I remember years ago, I was actually in Thailand on holiday, my last kind of proper fun trip before COVID hit, just a few weeks later. And I met these two British girls who were raised without any religion in their mind, no sense of religion. And we got to really connect on that trip, and doing this little island hopping. And by the time, we were done, we were like, going to all these different places together, cooking classes, fire dancing, all these kinds of things. And it was like, yeah, we're here with Tricia, our missionary friend, and some random guys throwing fire around me, And for them, it was so amazing, because they're like, we never thought, first of all, we would have so much time hanging out with a Christian, but also like that you're so normal. They had this, they would ask me questions because they had no idea. Say, are you allowed to marry? Like, are you allowed to do this and that? Like, they had no idea that, I could be a normal, regular human being with normal relationships in my life, normal aspirations, and still have this deep love of Jesus Christ and seek to live according to his precepts. And, they said, well, we're not into that whole institutional religion. But I said, it's not just about a religion, it's about a relationship. And that idea just blew them away. They had no idea. And, when we talk about especially relationship and catechesis, an important thing to keep in mind, a lot of people like to blame the schools. I think I was really blessed in some ways to have gone to a Christian school that really deeply helped us learn how to pray, develop that personal relationship with Jesus, go deep into Holy Scripture, and see its importance for our lives. And so that helped build upon, and this is important, a pre-existing foundation of who God and Jesus Christ and my Christian faith. I had a Catholic father, a Protestant mother, but they came together in this shared ecumenical understanding of Christianity and who God is in our lives and Christian values. I actually grew up going to church twice on Sundays with my family. First a Catholic Mass as a family to my father's church, and then as a family to my grandfather's church on my mother's side. He was born actually in Cheshire, moved to the States when he was young, and later became a Protestant minister. But at any rate, the important thing I was starting to understand is the importance of how faith begins in the home. So you can take your kids and drop them off at Catholic school, take them to Mass, but they're only going to get so much formation around the faith if you're not actually reinforcing that at home, and actually begins at home. Parents are the principal formators of their children, especially when it comes to faith and values, what we believe and how we're called to live out our lives as Christians. And if that isn't getting reinforced back home, that is actually meant to be the backbone of our faith. Then it doesn't matter. Sometimes you can have really good, amazing people at your school, at Mass, but if they come home to see this contradiction of faith and values and belief, then it's really going to add a lot of confusion to our youth as they're growing up in the faith. So that's one thing I want to bring up. And then another thing that comes to mind too is one of the friars who serves with our mission, he says, even back home in the US, he says, everybody wants to blame, their poor catechesis for why it took them so long to come back to their faith. But he said, that's still a lot of shifting the blame, because he says, poor catechesis is only half to blame. He said, we are also responsible for our own growth in the knowledge of our faith. And so we do bear some responsibility in that as well. And I've seen that in persecuted parts of Asia, where they didn't have the opportunity that we have so abundantly around us to grow in our faith. And they still very intentionally sought it out by whichever means they could find.
One of the things that's important to remember, that's a really important point you've made, Tricia, but I remember our friend Dr. Stephen Bullivant in his book Mass Exodus, well, it's actually in another book, this quote, but he says that a weak strain of the faith inoculates our children against the real thing. And I think that's the problem. I think Catherine and I would both give testimony to the fact that it wasn't that we, like the faith that we were introduced to as young Catholics was so horrible, that we grew up thinking, well, it couldn't be that, whatever it is. And then you have to work harder to find the real thing, don't you, Catherine?
Yeah. I mean, actually, I would say, like you, Mark, the devotions at home, my very early experience in the faith was really, unquestioning, just beautiful and happy and joyful. But this is the frustrating thing, is actually that then when we went to school, to Catholic schools and to catechism classes, and we coloured in pictures of Jesus and Mary and, made paper chains out of halos, or, just bizarre, ridiculous things that don't offer anything, then it started to crumble. So yes, the family matters, and yes, the parents are the primary educators, and yes, devotions at home matter, but that link between parish, school and home should be a solid support system, that one doesn't act against the other. Even though I agree with what you're saying, we can't outsource the learning of the faith and say, job done, leave it to the schools, but neither should we expect that to be unraveled and undone.
That is what we have been doing as well, isn't it? Especially in the UK, Tricia, there's been a lot of outsourcing going on, with where parents have been taught almost that they're not capable of educating their own children or catechizing their own children. And so it's been, the church does that, the parish priest does that, or the school does that. And then, people wonder why little Johnny don't go to Mass anymore,
Yeah. I think that's why the really good, more successful programs I've seen in terms of youth catechesis, it actively involved the parents in that catechesis work. And I think that's really important, because a lot of what we're recognizing now is the need to not just catechize the child, but re-catechize, or more properly catechize the parent as well. And so I really do applaud those youth catechesis programs that I've seen at basically different parishes and even in the schools, where they help to really reach out to the parents and help educate and reinform them about the beauty of their faith. And I think that's something that is lost sometimes, is there is this incredible beauty to our faith and all that it offers. There's something for everyone, regardless of your intellectual backgrounds, your interests and whatnot. There's something that should be attractive in the faith, that draws you in. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of what Bishop Barron has so famously said about, stop dumbing down the faith, because there is this beauty to it. And when we kind of water it down, it loses some of that essence. And we just need to dig a little deeper to see that flowing through. And
it's not just, it's sorry to interrupt you, Tricia. It's not just the watering down the intellectual element, that aspect, but it's also a watered down liturgy. And those who have discovered the beauty of the traditional liturgy, our faith is not first and foremost a propositional faith. I know I'm telling you, a missionary who go and proposes and proclaims the gospel, but it's not primarily. It's like this idea behind Bishop Barron's whole ministry of the via pulchritudinus, this way of beauty, which Mark can pronounce much better than me, that this has all happened like the perfect storm. Not only have we got weak catechesis and schools failing in their duty and outsourcing and being told trust the experts, but we also have this hollowed out liturgy where if you go to the traditional liturgy or to a more traditional mass, you cannot help but be moved and transformed by no proposition but the experience. And now that experience is stripped with the felt banners of the 1980s, and
well, I think that really varies on where you go. I think one of the blessings I've had is to experience the liturgy in various forms all around the world. And I would say one of the more powerful experiences of liturgy I've had is at the Missionaries of Charity Mother House in Calcutta, where people are, sitting or kneeling on bare cement floors, where the windows are open, and you can, even from the second story where the chapel is, hear all the blaring of the horns from the streets and down below. And yet when the Eucharist is offered up, everybody's eyes are glued to Christ present there in the Eucharist. And you have people from all over the world who are joined together, many of them who are not even baptized Christians. But I've talked to numerous people, Japanese, Spanish Americans, people who had left their faith, who had no faith at all when they first came there. And by virtue of the beauty and reverence that they find present in that liturgy, which is, just so it's in the hearts of the faithful gathered there together, they are transformed. They are truly transformed. And I've had incredible conversations with a lot of these non-Christian volunteers who've come to Calcutta for the Mother Teresa experience, as it were, and who are just beautifully transformed. Yes, by that reverence, by that, it just captures everything there in the liturgy. And it is a plain table with a plain background and a crucifix, of Christ with, as we know, Mother Teresa says, I thirst, a lovely statue to the Blessed Mother on the side, because they're very Marian. And, one half of the chapel is all these sisters in their saris, their habits. And then the last third with the fans blowing on them are the volunteers, from in all their mixtures of different colors and styles of clothing they're wearing. And they're all just brought to their knees by the beauty of what they're witnessing there in the Mass. Even if they're not fully comprehending what it is they're witnessing, they are drawn in and they are captivated.
And they're transformed by, the word you used is reverence. So when I talk about the tradition, it's not singularly smells and bells and but it's reverence. That's what we're talking about, and that is something that has that reverence is not always
transcendence, really, isn't it?
It's the transcendence. That is sometimes absent, which is why people come and go as if, well, this is nothing different. That transcendence. So it could be a plain table. Michael Matt's just back from Kenya and we heard from Father Wow, he calls himself, who is a missionary in Africa, and
Portuguese, isn't he?
Yeah, he's Portuguese. He's brilliant, very funny. And he was talking about his missionary work, and he said people will set off on a Saturday night to arrive on a Sunday morning to go to this liturgy that is so reverent, as you say, a simple table, but it is transcendent, it is reverent. It's not about the cloth, the gold, but it is about that reverence. And I suppose the juxtaposition I'm trying to get to is, in some cases, not in every case, of course, but in some cases where we have both that loss of a devotion, family devotion, that loss of the schools proposing gospel, and couple that with going into parishes where the priest talks about the weather during a homily and everyone's rushed out in half an hour, and you go up and you receive Jesus in your hands, and you know there's a sense that there is a loss of reverence there. Then these are the people who are falling away, because, as Mark said, they're getting, it's worse than nothing. They're getting a weak strain, which is inoculating them against the live strain of Christ.
You end up thinking, whatever the truth is, it isn't this. Tricia, you know, you're talking about that charismatic sort of proposition that you're giving people as a way in, you know, and then you're asking them if they, you know, like to make a choice or to come and follow, you know, would they like to know more, an invitation. Do you find then that people are still fascinated, you know, that choice is speaking to them on a microcosmic level, because it's a macrocosmic thing, isn't it? We're talking about, you know, fall and redemption and all those things in the way that you present it there. But is this something that people all over the world that you speak to have got no knowledge of the gospel, they recognize that in their lives, that sort of brokenness and the fact that they're living their lives with that hole, as St. Augustine said, you know, that can only be filled by God, and that they recognize in the kerygma, when you're preaching to them this message, this good news, they recognize that that's something that they're missing and they're looking for in their lives, would you say?
I would say most of the time, I think the one thing that's probably if I were to say there was a consistent obstacle that's ever gotten in the way of somebody recognizing that in their own life, Christian or non-Christian, having encountered the gospel or not, it's the sin of pride. That's probably, you know, this kind of narcissistic pride that says, oh yeah, I know people like that, but not me, you know. So that unwillingness to see within themselves, you know, their need for God. But by and large, the vast majority of people and countries around the world, including here in my own, there is this recognition and receptiveness and to one's brokenness, one's need for something greater than oneself, to offer them hope and healing. And that's something that is so beautiful about the gospel that we can offer people. It's usually actually the first thing that can hit them, or in some parts of the world where I've been, is just this understanding of being so absolutely loved by God. And know that there was a God, you know, again, going back to Spe Salvi by Pope Benedict XVI, you know, he talks about Saint Bakita, Josephine Bakita, who's a Canossian sister, and you know, after she had gone from slave master to slave master and finally was so blessed to encounter the gospel, she said the most important thing was to know how deeply loved I was by God. No matter what I would endure, I knew that there was a God who loved me and would help, and that he would help me to persevere through even the greatest of sufferings. And I found that so beautiful, that strength of conviction. And I think I believe that is what God's hope does for us. The hope in his love, trusting in his love for us in our lives. It's something we can hold on to, and it helps us truly to weather any storm.
That's beautiful. You know, to answer the Sherry Waddell, when Sherry Waddell asked that question, there was a Benedictine with me, a Benedictine priest, and he said, you are, so it echoes what you just said, you are loved, you are created, you are redeemed. You know, and I thought that was beautiful, that we've been formed in the womb, and that to begin with that God is love, and to, you know, that God has that love for all people, and it's that love that is effusive, that builds the church, builds the kingdom, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I mean, it just goes back to what Christ himself said, you know, that they will know you are my disciples by how you love one another. And so much of, you know, when we look at what the two greatest commandments are, and we see how much the first is fulfilled and how well we live out the second, and how love of neighbor really demonstrates our fulfillment of the Shema, right? The love.
Something
Yeah.
different about us as Christians. Yeah, it's a powerful thing, isn't it? The
Yeah.
other thing that I wanted to quickly mention was, like, because your missionary work is taking you to the East, and we were chatting a bit before we went live about Thailand, which I think is got this reputation, certainly in sort of theological circles, of being the most resistant country in the world to Christian evangelization, mainly because it's like Theravada Buddhism, and it's really tightly woven into the identity of the people. It's like 98% Buddhist. Do you have to be an apologist? Like, do you know, part of being a missionary in the East, does that mean that you have to know a lot about Islam and a lot about Buddhism and all, you know, Hinduism and stuff like that?
I think it's not even from a point of being an apologist so much as showing a genuine respect for the people that you're encountering.
Mm.
You've bothered to learn enough about their faith background, what they believe, to be able to look for that common ground. And that's where you can begin to have a dialogue. Because at the end of the day, evangelization, it's not a monologue. You know, it's about the sharing in one another's lives, finding those issues that we have in common. I remember a number of years ago, actually it was during COVID, because Taiwan was the only country open for business at the time. And I myself and somebody else with our mission, we had gone into Taiwan for a few months to serve, and I had met this young Buddhist woman in her probably mid to late 20s on a hike, and we just got to talking, and she shared a little bit. You know, she saw me with my rosary, and then I was praying at one point, and she said, "Oh wow, you know, I noticed you were praying back there." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "So what is it that you believe?" And I started sharing about my faith as a Catholic Christian. And I said, "What about yourself?" To notice my praying. And she said, "Oh, I'm Buddhist." And we began to share with one another about, you know, the things that we find this closeness in prayer to the divine. And that turned into a lunch conversation. That turned into a further meetup and a further meetup. And she is a very devout Buddhist. It wasn't just this kind of more superficial thing like you hear about a lot of times in like Japanese culture and some other regions of the world, like Hollywood, but like something that's she really did. She would go and volunteer to help out at her local monastery. You know, she'd sweep, she'd clean, she'd do all these other things, help out with the monks. And so very devout in her faith. But at the same time, she said, when you speak and you share about your faith in Jesus Christ, and she said, it's just my heart feels stirred,
Oh,
and
wow.
it feels almost
Wow.
alive and alight in a way that I can't even begin to describe. I hunger for more. And I was just having, you know, lunch conversation with Father Toby Lees, and we were talking at the Dominican Priory here, Pope Leo, and, you know, coming from this as an Augustinian, and, you know, we look at, you know, this beautiful legacy of St. Augustine and talking about that restless heart. And I think that was what the Holy Spirit was tapping into with this young woman I met in Taiwan, this Buddhist woman. And in the sharing of the faith, and this genuine care for who she is as a human being, as a beloved child of God. And she felt that. And that was something she really spoke to. She said there was this authenticness of witness, even though she didn't use quite the same terminology, that she said, it really speaks to my heart. And it like, you know, it's just like, it's something, she said, when I enter into conversation with you, it's like, and unlike any other conversation I've had with somebody. And I think it really comes back to your faith in God. And I really desire to know more about your God and your faith and what it is that you believe.
That's beautiful, and so
Wow.
powerful to like that kind of brings us round to a full circle about the ex ecclesia nulla salus stuff, because it's like that. I don't know if you've ever read, Ratzinger wrote a book called Truth and Tolerance.
No, I
Which
have.
it's really brilliant for your work. I would have thought it was, you know, perfect, but it's that idea, and the idea is that God, you know, the intersection of searches, we're searching for God, and God is reaching out to us through all time and in all history. And there are different ways that we can see that communication working, but most fullest in his Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. And so it's colouring in that picture, if you like. So many other cultures have got elements of the truth, and we need to, that missionary work is colouring in that picture, isn't it, with the fullness of truth.
Absolutely. Yes. That's something that all of us, have that calling to do, whether we find ourselves again within the neighborhoods of humanity here to make Christ present to all those we encounter in our midst, or if it's to go off into that foreign land.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Wonderful. That's really hopeful. It's great to have you share your stories with us, Tricia, and you're here in the UK for a little longer, and maybe you want to say a little about your visit here.
Yeah, so I just finished my time in Wales, and I was so blessed to be invited by Father Gareth Lation to speak at a number of parishes out in Wales. I'm in London now for a few more days this week, and then I'll be going to the University of Edinburgh to speak there at their chaplaincy before heading off to Rome and then back to Asia.
Is there a website people can find out what you're up to, or follow you on socials or anything like that?
So if you go to laymissionary.org, so that's LAY missionary.org, that's our website. And Lay Missionary is where you can find us on Instagram, social media, YouTube. We're available there too. I'd love to hear from you. And, one of the things that's, I think, if it hasn't already been self-evident in our sharing today is, Christ says that the harvest is plenty and the workers are few. And we definitely need more laborers in the harvest. So whether you feel called to serve in a foreign culture or not, we all have a unique vocation to witness to Christ wherever we find ourselves. And I do encourage you, if you feel that missionary call within yourself, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out. We're in need of many vocations. As we shared earlier, our mission serves the persecuted and minority church in Asia, and there is so much need. Most of the regions we serve are less than 10%, sometimes less than 1% Christian. So there's a huge need throughout Asia to continue to share that light and love of Christ for all the world to see, inviting people into his truth, his love, his salvation. And if you don't feel that particular call to serve in the mission field, there's always ways that you can support our mission through your prayer and your financial support, and just simply witnessing Christ in your own way, in your own life. Again, we are all called to that work of evangelization as baptized Christians. So, as Saint Junipero Serra always reminds us, adelante, let us carry on. Always
wonderful. Thanks, Tricia.
Great. Perfect place to end. Let us carry on. Thank you so much for joining us, Tricia, and we wish you the very best with your journey here before you travel back to the Far East. And we'll continue to keep you in our prayers, and the work you're doing is so important, and I hope people do visit. If you look in the links below, you'll see a way to navigate to the website and contact if you're interested in this kind of work, if you feel called to it. So it's wonderful to talk with you, because it's so hopeful, and I think we are in need of such hope. We are a slightly battered people, so to hear you say these wonderful stories and to speak with such conviction and authenticity is great. So thank you.
Thank you, both of you.
Okay, God bless. Please, if you haven't already, visit also catholicunscripted.com, where you can keep up to date with all our videos and our articles. But for now, thanks for watching. Goodbye.